All right, good afternoon, Dad.
Good afternoon.
So today is Sunday, July 20th. We're doing an episode today because you'll be flying to Moscow tomorrow, so we can't do an
Correct.
episode then. Um, I want to start you off with something. I feel like World War III is coming. It's going to happen. Do you think so? Can you talk me out of this? Convince me it's not going to happen?
Well, I can't convince you it's not going to happen. I don't think it'll happen, but yeah, the risks are real. The conflict in Ukraine continues, and I think when Trump came into office, we breathed a sigh of relief because we sensed that we're stepping off. The U.S. was stepping off of the escalation ladder. Okay, no more ATACMS strikes into pre-2014 territory, for example. Beginning of talks, maybe actual negotiations. Those were all very encouraging signs, but it looks very much like we're getting back onto the escalation ladder. Now there's talk, about new long-range missiles, maybe JASSMs, maybe even the Tomahawk. At present they're saying no, 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 we're not going to do that. But we know how it is. We've seen these things happen before. Initially, some weapon system is proposed, and then there were denials, insistence, that, oh yeah, we'll never use that, and then eventually it's used. We've seen that happen. So there's reasons to be concerned, certainly is reason to be concerned. As long as we keep on going up this escalation ladder, the chance of a larger war is there. And then we get these very disturbing statements by European leaders. Prepare for war with Russia. There will be a larger war in 2 years. I think was it the Polish president who just said that he expected war with Russia in 2027. I don't know why, but that's what he was saying. And you hear similar things from German officials and other European leaders. So yeah, there's reason to be concerned. Nothing is certain, and I think we've said before, maybe the most, you could say, reassuring aspect of the situation, or maybe we shouldn't say reassuring, but the aspect of the situation that should give us some hope, quite a bit of hope, is just the weakness of Europe and NATO. We had an acknowledgement of that weakness recently from the Pentagon. It reported, we just have to put a pause on these shipments because we're running out. And we know that's true. Now, recently, Trump talked tough and said, okay, yeah, the Europeans are going to send them, and then, they're going to pay for it, and et cetera, et cetera. And everybody's really confused. And the Germans, when he's talking about the Europeans, he's really talking about the Germans because they're the only ones, who are willing and capable of doing anything. They said, we don't really know what he's talking about, and we don't have any systems to spare. There's the earliest we can get something is maybe 8 months from now. And we're not talking about a lot either. So, you just look at that. Okay, there are these bellicose statements from European leaders. There is this increasing escalation, but at the same time, there's just a weakness, just a complete, incompetence or incapability on the side of NATO. And that maybe is what's going to save us. Like when it comes to shove, push comes to shove, they just don't have what it takes to actually fight World War III. And so maybe that's why we won't have World War III.
Unless it just goes straight nuclear. That's what's so scary, is if we don't have anything, would we go nuclear?
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, that's the terrifying thing about this conflict, is that we have nuclear armed forces on both sides. And, in the early stage of the war, in the first few months, there was talk, the Russians may go desperate and they may go nuclear. I don't think that ever existed as a possibility. And the Russians, it's clear that the Russians have the upper hand. They have no incentive of going nuclear. But if, the other side views this whole thing as existential and they double down and they fail again and again, well, then who knows? I don't think they would go nuclear, but these people, these are not wise statesmen that we should really place a great deal of confidence in. And if they really do view it as existential, then they just might. If they don't have any conventional means, then you reach for the nuclear.
This is why I feel like it's coming. I mean, one, we just have Ukraine is on the verge of collapse. It sounds like Pokrovsk is about to fall. And when it does, there's going to be open roads for the Russians. And I think that's going to put a huge amount of pressure on the Europeans and Trump to do something drastic. We also have the situation in the Middle East. Israel is going to continue its genocide in Gaza and keep on pissing off the rest of the world and turning them against Israel. And we have this active situation with Iran that is not over. And we know that it's just a matter of time before this starts up again. And they're going to do whatever they can to bring the United States in. And then the scariest part of the whole thing is we have the whole Epstein thing that's going on in the background. And if it's true, like if I was president and people were accusing me of raping kids, and if it's true that happened, I would do anything to not let that story, get out and just do whatever we can to divert your attention and say, okay, let's we got two conflicts here that I can easily flip a switch and start World War III. When the pressure's on, politicians do that. They want to deflect. They want to try to change the narrative. And I think it was you when you were talking with Garland Nixon said, Clinton did something similar with the whole scandal. He started he bombed Iraq, right?
No, it was actually, I believe, Sudan. It was supposed to be a chemical weapons plant. I think it was just a pharmaceutical plant. And he bombed it, and a lot of people at the time, I think the majority of analysts said this was just clearly an effort to distract from the Monica Lewinsky scandal. It seemed like a transparent, really, attempt to get people to look the other way. And that's right. One thing is like when we talk about these leaders, it's often domestic policy concerns that drive them. Even in the foreign policy sphere. We've gone into that about Netanyahu. He's in a very precarious situation, and therefore he's incentivized actually to start new wars or to escalate in the wars that he's already started. And whenever he does that, he's able to delay court dates. We're talking about his corruption trial, but then there's the problem of his coalition that's on the verge of collapsing. It was on the verge of collapsing actually just prior to the launch of the 12-Day War. The ultra-Orthodox were about to pull out because he wasn't giving them, exemptions from military service. And but when the war started, and when they put their concerns aside, and everybody's rallied around the flag, supported Netanyahu. It worked very well for him. But the same problem's coming up. He has those same pressures. So, he's always under pressure to escalate or to launch a new war. But I'm just using it as an example. It's just true of any political leader. It's true of Starmer. It's true of Meretz. And all these people have severe political problems, domestic problems. And then, but wars can be their ticket, their way out. I think that's, and it certainly could be true for Trump too. You pointed to the Epstein scandal. It's something that's really been a major blow to his reputation and to his, it's a scandal that just won't go away. And that, who knows, how he's going to deal with it. But there's always a temptation to do something, in the military or foreign policy sphere, again, to launch a war, we mentioned Clinton. Back then, there weren't these huge conflicts going on. There wasn't a major war in the Middle East. There certainly wasn't a war in Europe or anything at that scale. But we have these major conflicts, that are already, very dangerous and are on the verge of becoming something much larger. And so he could if Trump decides that he has to distract, he has to become a wartime president, it won't be bombing a pharmaceutical plant in Sudan. It may be just throwing some oil on one of these fires that are already raging, and we will have something much, much worse. It could be Iran, but it could be Ukraine.
Right. No, it's scary because we've talked about this many times in the past, that both Zelensky and Netanyahu are desperate men, and that's what makes them so dangerous. And their ticket out is to expand the war, to bring the United States in, to bring NATO in. That's their only real hope. And then what was saving us was that, okay, Trump shouldn't be desperate, so he hopefully won't fall for that. But if Trump becomes desperate, and I think that's what's going to happen, like if he doesn't have complete transparency with the Epstein thing, if he doesn't release all the videos and files and just everything, then people are just going to assume that, what do they have on you, Trump? Are you a pedophile as well? Like, people are asking that question, and that makes Monica Lewinsky thing look like nothing. Like, you think that was a bad scandal? I mean, you're having an affair with someone of legal age. Yeah, you're a scummy guy. But we're talking about some of the most evil acts in this blackmailing pedophile ring that is very sinister, very dark. And if you're not able to shake that off, dispel that, you're in big, big trouble. So I just feel like if he is, he doesn't release this, doesn't come clean with everything, I'm really worried. I really think that, like, what could be a possible worse accusation and a worse destruction of a legacy than this? This is it, right? You're ruined. So, and then you might start buddy up more and more with Zelensky and with Netanyahu, and it seems like that's what's happening. In the beginning, we thought that maybe he's putting some distance with Netanyahu. He retweeted that thing on Truth Social where it had Jeffrey Sachs calling Netanyahu a deep, dark son of a bitch. And then we saw Zelensky coming to the White House, and he just reprimanded him in front of the whole world. And we thought, okay, maybe we were going to have some real change. But now it seems like it's all reversed. Netanyahu's his best friend. He seems to be sliding back in, getting pissed off with Putin and getting back on Zelensky's side. And it's like, uh-oh, now we got these two desperate men that are leaders of countries that are in dire straits, that they're in big trouble, and they're both being backed by the United States, and the United States is trying to extricate itself. But now we got Trump, who might be compromised, and might be desperate. And now I'm just like, oh God, this is it. Like, how do we do? And if there is a war, like you're saying, I've been playing it out. It's like, well, we can't wage a war conventionally. You're not going to get people to draft and go fight Iran or go fight Russia. We can't wage it through proxies because we're running out of missiles. We're running out of interceptors, So what do? We go nuclear. And then I'm just like, okay, well, what's the real estate like in Patagonia or South Africa? Do I have to move?
Yeah. I say, I will still say it's a remote possibility that we have a nuclear war, let's say in the next few years, a remote, but it's not, it's not entirely negligible. We are living in dangerous times. The chance of something like that happening is much greater now than it's been ever since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And some people argue, I think, persuasively, that the risks are even higher now in some ways than they were during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yeah, there is reason to be worried. Again, I don't think it's going to happen, but that's but there's reason to be worried. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, but just think of it, if this Epstein stuff and Trump all involved in it, if it's real, like to me that's the scariest thing. If it is, because then it's like, what will you do? That is going to be a desperate man that's going to might do some crazy things, and it's not even just, it's not just Trump, like you said, it's just the whole government. Did you see, you saw that amendment that Marjorie Taylor Greene tried to put in on Congress?
The one to reduce aid to Israel by $500 million.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we have 535 members of Congress?
Right.
How many voted against that?
Voted for it actually was.
Oh, right. Voted for amendment to remove it. Right.
Voted. Supported it. There were a total of 6, I believe. There was Marjorie Taylor Greene. There was Thomas Massey. There was Omar and Tlaib. And then there were 2 other.
Al Green and Summerlee.
Okay.
So Al 4 Green Democrats and 2 Republicans.
4 Democrats and 2 Republicans. That's a pretty pathetic showing. An interesting group, a mix of people right there. But, more power to them.
Let me actually play you a clip. This is from Marjorie Taylor Greene, just so people can see what Marjorie Taylor Greene said, and then realize all the people that voted against this amendment to remove $500 million, $500 million of aid to Israel's defense. Okay.
Israel bombed a Catholic church in Gaza, and that an entire population is being wiped out as they continue their aggressive war in Gaza. My amendment would strike $500 million in funding for nuclear-armed Israel's missile defense system. The U.S. already provides Israel with $3.8 billion annually in foreign aid. $3.8 billion, that's a lot of money. Additionally, the April 2024 security supplemental included $8.7 billion for Israel. Even though Israel, nuclear-armed Israel, has universal health care for their citizens and subsidized college for their citizens. They're able to provide that. However, here in America, we're $37 trillion in debt. My amendment will ensure an America First Department of Defense, and that is exactly what we need and we haven't had for a very long time.
Yeah, very well said.
Right, but, and you hear that, and you think, well, this would be the easiest amendment to pass. Of course, this is a piece of cake, right? This makes complete sense. Only six out of 535 members of Congress, voted for this amendment to just suspend $500 million. I mean, we're still sending tons. And she makes a great point about the fact that we're sending all that money, and they have universal health care and free university, whatever. Right. And we, the United States is $37 trillion in debt, but we have to keep on sending it. And none of our politicians, American politicians that are supposed to be looking after the well-being of us, Americans.
Right.
We only have six. Like, does that mean that all the other ones, they're all compromised? Like, they should all be out of office. But that's just, it shows how daunting this Zionist control is. Like, oh my God, only six congressmen. Like, this is insane.
Right. You notice, for example, OAC wasn't part of it, but that's a separate issue. Yeah. AOC, I think I said OAC. Right. Yeah, AOC. She wasn't a part of it, but that doesn't surprise me. Yeah, only six. That's remarkable. And I'm sure, like, if you took her statement and you did a poll, for example, of the entire spectrum of the American population, I think you would find that a large majority would support what she just said right there. It should be it should be easy. But that just shows you really the lack of democracy. There are certain special interests that really run this country, and one of them is, the Zionists. That's just part of it. It's, those, why are the other, 530 approximately members of Congress, not joining her in this? And the reason is, well, we know, where the money comes from, and it's just
then we're screwed, right? Yeah. We're screwed. Then we will get dragged into some war thanks to, Netanyahu in Israel. Like,
it's very serious. I mean, the consequences. It's awful that we're complicit in these horrible crimes. But then just looking at the consequences of our complicity is American prestige has suffered greatly. And there's always a risk of course, of us becoming involved in a larger war. And, we came very close with this recent war. We did become involved, but the involvement was limited. But maybe next time, it won't turn out that way. The costs are much more than economic. They affect, again, we've talked about the three pillars. They really affect this relationship, this poisonous relationship between U.S. and Israel has been eating away at all three pillars that support, American power.
Okay, so you still think that we're not going to have World War III? I mean, despite the fact that, just kind of what we've talked about now, the Epstein pressure on Trump, the fact that only 6 congressmen out of 535 voted to say no more, not even no more military aid. We're sending, like she said, $3.8 billion a year. Yeah. Just cut it down $500 million because we are in debt. We are
right.
People can't pay their rent here. It's not. it's crazy how expensive things have gotten in America. It really is. And I really noticed it because, I was in China for 10 years and I came back and I was like, you guys let this whole country go to hell. I was gone for 10 years and it fell apart without me, so trying to put it back together now. So, I just, so do you think?
Yeah. Maybe I'm just hopelessly naive, but I think, again, that there are just enough sane people in power still in places like the Pentagon who will just say, no, we just can't go down that. We already heard that with for example, the Tomahawk missiles. No, we're not doing that. And another thing is the Taurus, in Germany, there was this kind of steady drumbeat. Germany needs to send Taurus missiles. Olaf Scholz, who was, proved himself to have, absolutely no backbone whatsoever. He caved in on everything else, but he held the line on the Taurus. And then when, Merz took office, there was talk, he clearly wanted to do it. But I think, again, it was like the people in the German military establishment that just said, no, we really can't do this. There are people that are holding the line. And that's, a long ways from actually pressing the nuclear button. I think that, we get a lot of these bombastic statements, these threats, and these moves towards escalation. Potentially, there will be further escalations, but nuclear war. Again, it takes us closer and closer to it, and so we ought to be worried. Yeah, we ought to be ringing the alarm bells. I still think that we'll stop short of it, and. In the end, we're just going to have to admit defeat. It's something that again, the establishment in Europe and the United States really does not want to do. Of course not. But I think in the end, they will have to just admit defeat in Europe, in the Ukraine, in particular. Now, again, I'm actually a little bit more worried about Israel, because they have become so reckless. And they could, we did have this one war, but if it starts again, it could be a lot worse for them a second time. And again, we have people in charge there who I think really would. Maybe I'm a fool, but I think there are enough sane heads in, the Pentagon and places like that to say, no. I'm not so sure about Israel. I mean, it's just that these people are just so, you see the behavior, like,
just every bombing day Syria now. I mean,
yeah, right. The presidential palace, the Ministry of Defense.
Right, and they just murdered 67 people that were in line waiting for aid yesterday. It's just every day there's another massacre of civilians just trying to get food, trying to survive, and it's just like, we're our greatest ally. They have the right to defend us. It's like, give me a break. And the whole world is just done with it. I just don't understand.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that kind of behavior in general, it just makes you wonder. First of all, it just seems like there's a total disregard now for even what the rest of the world thinks about them. It used to be that the Israelis were careful and it mattered to them. They did terrible things, but they were careful about what they did. They paced themselves, let's put it that way. And now they've thrown caution to the winds. And they just don't give a damn. That's the sense that you get. I mean, the massacre every day, they found they can get away with it. Okay, most of the vast majority of the world hates them, but they don't care. They have the U.S. at their back. They saw this recent vote. Hey, we still control Congress. What do we have to worry about? Right. And so there's just this recklessness, this total lack of morality, and this total disregard for the value of human lives in these, the neighboring countries. So I think... I don't think it happened, but I think it's more likely to happen in the Middle East than it is to happen in Ukraine or, in Europe, because of the kind of people that we're talking about. And again, this is they are provoking these wars, and, we saw that they had to pay the cost when they did that with Iran, but they want to do it again, and maybe the next time, Iran really has them on the ropes. If it goes on longer, they completely run out of air defense missiles, there will be talk. I'll tell you, there will be talk within the Israeli, ruling circles about using nuclear weapons. I don't know that it'll happen, but I bet they'll start thinking about it. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, just okay. Imagine this then. I mean, these are both scenarios that I think are very likely to happen, and probably a good chance they'll happen simultaneously. Pokrovsk falls. Russia starts making much more rapid advances. Ukraine is on full collapse. They're marching on Kiev. That's a whole disaster. Europe is going ballistic. Huge amounts of pressure to escalate dramatically, to pull in NATO directly to this conflict. And then at the same time, what's happening, Netanyahu, his trial was supposed to restart. He luckily got food poisoning, so now it's delayed again. But he's going to have to start this back up at some point because he's going to face his corruption charges, and he's like, okay, well, we got to get the war going. Restarts the war with Iran. Israel is getting effed up. It's getting messed up by these missiles, and they're begging for help from the United States. And we just saw that recent vote in Congress. Israel still owns our Congress, so we'll probably try to do. We'll be doing things to get more involved, but we'll see what we can do because we obviously have limitations. And then on top of all that, the whole country, the whole world is accusing Trump of potentially being a pedophile or protecting pedophiles at the very least. And this is incredibly damning. And then all of a sudden, you have all this stuff happening at the same time. And and Trump is just like, I can just push this one button, just make it all go away. Just make it all go away. I mean, I feel like that's what will happen. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it's just like, if all this stuff is happening at once, it's just like the perfect storm to just go completely irrational. Like the idea of just starting nuclear war, it just seems so absurd. But
right,
our current situation is just, it's so scary. It's so dangerous.
Yeah.
Because
right.
this evil.
We are in a very, very dangerous territory. There was some recognition of that at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, right? We even had statements from Biden, we can't do that. We can't send them tanks. That would be World War III. So there was some caution in this. And then we began to kind of, again, cross our own red lines. And now we've gone down this path to the point, we're in very dangerous territory. If it, because it happened in step-by-step fashion, it wasn't, I don't think people are aware of how far we've traveled. But now we've already sent these directly attacked pre-2014 Russian, territory as with the ATACMS. Again, this is a U.S. attack on Russia. And if we're talking about doing that again or doing something similar, maybe the Jassons will be brought in, which again would be similar. And again, these would be American attacks. And it's just like, and then Russia at some point will have to respond. I mean, there's this thing, the Russians, they bluff, but the Russians are very slow to respond, but eventually when they do, they can respond very forcefully. And to give you one example is the SMO itself. I think it took a lot of us by surprise because the Russians just didn't respond to so many provocations. And they started giving these warnings, and the warnings that they rejected, the Russians are bluffing. And then they actually launched this attack, right, in 2022. So, it's the same thing. Again, Putin is unwilling, but he shows that he's cautious, he's careful, but if he feels like he has to, he will do it. And if we start launching, especially let's say extended range Jassons, and they can strike Moscow or St. Petersburg, which they would be capable of doing, he would just have to respond, with something proportionate. Meaning, by proportionate, it would have to be an attack on, just as, the Americans, NATO is attacking Russia, Russia would have to attack NATO, maybe in Romania or Poland or something. And then who knows where we go. These are things that could happen. We've taken ourselves right up to the edge right there. And there are not enough people that are shouting loudly, this has to stop. Of course, there are some, but too many people, I think, are not paying attention. They kind of been lulled because it's been gradual. They don't realize really how far we've gone, and then we just have people. We don't have statesmen in charge anymore. We have
got
people
a bunch
like
of
Trump.
pedophiles.
Well, yeah, I don't know that Trump is or whatever. but he clearly has a problem here. He is somehow, in what way, I'm not going to say because I just don't know, implicated in the scandal. You get that sense. And, which is not surprising. We know that he's implicated. I mean, there are all these pictures of him partying with Jeffrey Epstein back in the early 2000s. And, maybe it wasn't actually pedophilia or anything like that, but it's bad, whatever it is. And he doesn't want it out. I think that's true. I think that's probably a pretty safe assumption. And, Trump, he's not, I think it's fair to say that he's not a warmonger. War generally is not his first choice. Probably we've had other presidents where maybe we're quicker to resort to war. But he's also just a very unstable, unpredictable person, and who clearly has some sense that he is exceptional, that he is maybe been appointed by God to do great things. He talks like that all the time. We laugh it off, but it is kind of disturbing sometimes the way he talks about himself.
I mean, that Mike Huckabee message that he retweeted,
right.
That's still one of the scariest things I saw.
That's right. Yeah, and it's true socials. You just read them and you start to wondering, it's just like, this guy demented? What is he? So you just worry, this guy is close to that button. Now, I just hope to God, and I don't think it'll happen, but there is a lot of reasons to be worried. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, you just covered, some of the Epstein stuff and what's happening in Ukraine and our escalation. But like I said, the most dangerous spot is actually Israel. And I mean, if Israel's getting hit really hard, they have, like Marjorie Taylor Greene was saying, nuclear armed Israel. Israel has nuclear weapons that it's not supposed to have, that it's,
right.
It stole from us and it's not part of the NPT, and we're bombing Iran. The whole thing is just so hypocritical. It's so crazy.
Right. Well, in so many ways, actually, we're just actually depending on the so-called adults in the room. And that's really Putin and Pezeshkian, or the, Ayatollah Khamenei. I think they have shown great restraint in these wars. They understand the dangers, and so they felt, but they too come to a point where they're just forced to respond. We see that they're very reluctant to, but Israel will keep on pushing, the West will keep on pushing, will keep on escalating to the point where they have to, and it becomes an existential question for their own nations.
Yeah, well, I mean, Israel's not going to get away with this. Like with the situation with Iran. They had that one chance, that red wedding-esque attack, and it didn't work, and now they're screwed. So it's just a matter of time, I think, before Israel finds itself in an existential state where it's like, the state of Israel is collapsing, it's falling apart, we're getting pounded too hard, and they have no air defense, people are fleeing. And we know about the Samson option, and then they'll probably, start to threaten the United States. Like, if you don't get in for all the way, then we'll have to use a nuclear weapon. So you got to start doing something, or you use a nuclear weapon in America.
Right.
You do. Pressure will come on.
Right. Yeah,
and so that's what's
right. Well, I think it's
more
more
happen.
like. Yeah, I think that actually that is a very likely scenario. I think it's like the odds are even or better than even that we're going to see that let's say within the next year, where Israel actually starts to threaten. Maybe it's done privately or whatever, but they're saying, we are looking at using a nuclear weapon, and yeah, that'll bring us in. I'm afraid, and then but that may not solve the problem. That's the thing.
Right. It won't.
It just,
right. What are you going to do? You nuke Tehran? And kill millions of people, and you think that's going to solve your problem?
Yeah, well, I'm not saying that actually that's what would happen. There would be the threat to use it that would bring the U.S. in conventionally, but on a massive scale. But then Iran would be, would have to remove all constraints and just go after like the U.S. Navy and those military bases that are so vulnerable.
Right. Close the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah. Right. That
China,
kind of thing. I think that's their nuclear option that they have is blocking the Strait of Hormuz, and
Is there something?
Yeah, we're talking about some really scary stuff.
We're talking about adults in the room. We talk about Iran and Putin showing restraint. But is there somebody that can China? Can China just shut it all down? Because they are the manufacturing power plant. They'll just be like, listen, America, no more plastic red Solo cups for you guys until you back down. It's stuff. And then we're like, oh no more beer pong. It's over. People are going to revolt on the street once the Walmart shelves are empty. I mean, America makes everything. I mean, China makes everything, including the rare earths, everything that we have. They could cripple the United States, and maybe I don't want to. I live here, obviously. I don't want them to shut everything down. But I don't want nuclear war. So, like, if things start to get crazy, can China flex its muscle and stop something like this? Well, sink the dollar, dump all of the U.S. treasuries it holds, and it's like, okay, all right, sorry, dollar, you're done. It's over.
Yeah, no, it's true, and that's something that the U.S. has to consider. I think that China knows that it can do these things, and I think actually did. In that the recent trade war, the economic war that Trump launched against China, that they began to exercise some of those options, shutting down rare earths, for example. And, well, that just brought us to the negotiating table very quickly. And so I don't know exactly what the status of the negotiations or the agreement that's worked back, but the 145% tariffs are no longer in place. But it just seems like there's just there's nobody really in charge in this country. Now we're talking about 100% or 500% tariffs. It's just like, don't you understand what's going on? It's just like, I don't know. This is we are no longer the hyperpower, but we're trying to pretend that we are. I mean, if Trump was president, 25 years ago, he probably could get away with this stuff. And again, it's just like, China would just have to submit. Russia would have to submit to so many things, as they did, especially Russia back then. But it's just a different world, and it's
I think that there really isn't the Western world. We were the hyperpower, really the dominant force, but I think the relative power of these other countries has gotten so large that we're not fully aware of it, and only people that are really paying close attention to these conflicts can understand on it. Because if you're just looking at GDP numbers, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But
right. Yeah,
I think
Russia is still really is nothing compared to NATO countries, in terms of nominal GDP. But it just clearly that can give you a false sense of superiority, and clearly it's been proven false by the developments in this war.
Right, and I just sort of realized as well that NATO in itself, having all these members, really didn't make NATO stronger. It's this.
Oh yeah, that never made any sense.
There's no sovereignty amongst any of these countries. They don't have their own military industrial bases and their own technologies. They just abdicated everything to the United States and just assumed that the United States will be top dog forever. So they just kind of were complacent. So throughout the whole Western world, there really isn't any sort of
Well, that's a big problem. Yeah,
innovation.
Especially in Europe. I mean, you have this. First of all, a free rider problem, right? When these small countries join either the EU or NATO, right? The incentive is, well, we're just a little country, but now we're being taken care of. We're, the umbrella has been placed over us, and we're safe. And everybody has an incentive to try to contribute the bare minimum and just assume that it's the larger countries, and especially the U.S., is going to take care of them. That's what you see happening. There's the 2% target, but very few even met that. Now they're talking about 5%, but that's total nonsense.
And even the spending, that doesn't mean that much. That's what we talk about. They're not developing, effective for-purpose military equipment. It's just this overpriced crap that they can't scale up. I mean, maybe it's not all crap. Maybe some of it's good.
Some of it's good, yeah.
But they're not able to produce in any quantities. They're just flashy things at expos. That's what we're realizing. We just can't. We don't have any industrial capacity in the West, so it's just like there is no superpower in the West. The U.S. we just assumed was this unstoppable force, but if you're really peeling back the layers and looking at it, I don't think you can say it's a superpower. You look nothing compared to China or Russia. I mean, India, Iran. I mean, all these other countries. I feel like really are much further ahead of us in terms of the ability to have industrial capacity to produce things at scale, and also just having if we talk about the pillars, just having some moral superiority as well, and just even economically, we can't look at these GDP numbers. We find out that it's just bogus. These are just numbers on a screen that they can just manipulate, push around.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things that one of the truths that's been revealed by this war. It surprised me. Those GDP figures were completely meaningless. Even the PPP, the purchasing power, parity figures, which are much closer to the reality, it still seems not to really fully reflect, it doesn't really tell you what the manufacturing power of these countries, their relative power is. And then you just have this larger problem, especially within Europe. It's just like with the EU. You have this very ungainly, apparatus, which is not really, entity, the creature, the EU, which is not really a nation. But it's taking over a lot of the functions of the nation states, and these countries have ceded a lot of their sovereign power to it. But itself is not really a nation. And nobody in Europe wants to die for Brussels, is willing to make sacrifices really for Brussels. It's just it's in the old days where you did have Italy was Italy and France, and so on. There's national pride, and that could lead to war. But I mean, these are people, soldiers were willing to fight and die for their country. It meant something to be a Frenchman. It doesn't mean anything to be a member of the EU. You just see certain benefits from it, but it's just that there is no emotional ties there. And I think that's actually very significant when you're talking about a war. You need to have this very strong sense of identity and commitment to your people, and we can see it, in the Ukraine war. But it just doesn't exist throughout the EU. It's just the EU is really corroded as national identity. So recently a poll came out actually about, I don't know if you saw it, it was taken in Italy, and it showed that only 1 in 6 Italians, 16%, were actually willing to fight for Italy if Italy was attacked. 1 in 6.
Really?
Yeah. But I think you would find something similar in a lot of these countries. I mean, it's just the sense of national identity is corroded. So I mean, even if you look at these GDP figures and whatever, it's just all meaningless. You have to have people who are really committed, to a national cause and, willing to make sacrifices. And you don't have that. Okay, now you have these commitments to spend a lot of money, but you don't have people that really even believe in what they're doing. And so it's just going to be a way to line pockets, just like our own MIC. I don't see a change. It seems like we really can't get out of that. We've created this system that enriches a lot of people, and the arms manufacturers, but doesn't really produce. It produces some good weapons, but it doesn't produce them at scale. In sufficient quantities. It doesn't produce weapons that are durable and cost effective. It's the first, the overriding purpose of this whole system is to enrich the people that are involved in it, because we don't have, again, there's a fundamental lack of patriotism. Maybe that's what you could say all around. It's just like everybody, like within the Europe, but I think in the U.S. too. It's just sort of like, what can I get out of it? It's just something. It's just like it's the trough that we're all feeding at, and that over time, that our sense of commitment and identity really it's hollowed out. It's still there's a lot of boasting or whatever, but there just doesn't seem to be any substance to it.
Yeah, well, I think if you take that poll here in the United States, you might find something maybe not 1 in 6, but I think what that's reflecting is that you're saying that there's nothing worth defending in this country anymore, is what the Italians are saying. And a large reason I think we have that feeling is our complicity in the Gaza genocide. This doesn't reflect my morality. And then the fact that, okay, I don't want to go to war and fight for a bunch of, corrupt, compromised pedophiles, or I don't want to fight for this country if this is our rule, if they're just enslaving us with more and more debt, and they are pillaging and engaging in all these evil acts. It's like, then it's like, good. Maybe have somebody invade and take over, and we'll have a better government because this one has failed us. And I think that's what a lot of people in the Western world are feeling. They're just like, yeah, there's nothing worth fighting for here. I remember this. I think I was fairly patriotic as a kid. I was. Yeah, I remember going to school and listening to that song. I'd gladly stand up next to her, defend her. And I love this land. God bless the USA. Like indoctrinating me to be a good little soldier and fight for this country. And now it's just like, if there's an enlistment, where to sign up for? I'll sign up for Iran before the United States. That's where I think a lot of people are. That's wild. Like I don't want to defend and protect our political leaders that aren't working for our interests and pushing us into these wars.
Yeah.
So
well, okay. Yeah, you may be exceptional. I don't think most people would actually sign up for Iran. But
no, I'm saying if there were two recruitment lines and you were forced to choose one, like okay, you want to go here and defend Israel? It's like
you're right.
Get out of here.
Yeah. Well, the truth is that though, you're not that exceptional. It's just that if you do look at the polls in all these countries, all of these governments, the ones that we're talking, the main ones that are supporting these wars, okay, the U.S., the U.K., France, Germany, okay, these are the main powers. All of their leaders are really underwater in the polls. Without exception. I mean, Trump is actually well underwater, but he's doing better than others. A lot better than Macron, for example. And these other leaders are hated. And that's just what you find. Throughout these governments are not loved and supported by their people, and they may have, the people in general may not fully understand what's going on, but they understand enough to know that this is a government that's not really committed to them and to their best interests. And so, because they have that understanding, I think you do get these kind of poll results. Yeah, I'm not going to fight for this country.
Right. And so all these leaders, they're all getting desperate. The whole Western world, the whole Western political elite is getting desperate. And then the further that the Ukraine war grinds on, what's happening with Israel and all of its neighbors in Iran, don't you think that World War III is pretty likely? Or not World War III, just like a nuclear exchange, a nuclear war. I'm just really scared of that now. And maybe I'm being paranoid but I just feel like, you got all these desperate leaders that are compromised, that don't have a moral compass at all. And they just, they're in a sticky situation.
Yeah. Well, I don't think using nuclear weapons is going to be very popular and get them out of the difficult situations they're in. But I guess the positive signs are their lack of popularity. They don't have the popular support, and potentially they can. These governments may be replaced with some government that is significantly, substantively different in the policies that it pursues. We haven't seen that yet. But there's a potential. There is this growing gap between the leaders and the led, and then there's just a general weakness of the West. In the end, that makes them look at the nuclear option. I know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, is there something else you want to cover? Am I missing anything?
No.
Sometimes I just want to orient myself, like what I should be focusing on more. Are they just the whole thing's falling apart? We got Epstein, we got Israel, Iran, and the Ukraine. What are you looking at mostly? Is just the whole thing?
Yeah. Well, it's hard to look at the whole thing. It's just like there is so much going on that. I guess some days they focus more on Ukraine, and other days they focus more on what's happening in Israel and in the larger Middle East. But in general, I guess I try to keep up on events in all these places. I just don't have the same, I'm just not able to keep up with domestic American politics the way that I once was able to. I just find I just don't have the time for it. But I know that potentially it's important because, it's like these political leaders are actually often, they actually respond to domestic political pressures first. This is really what explains most of their behavior. So, yeah, it's just that things are looking grim for Trump. He's only 6 months into his term, and it's just hard to believe. I think I just saw some poll that predicted that the Republicans might lose 50 seats or so in the midterm elections. So, these are all things that he's looking at, and it's going to affect his calculations. And I just, it could be in very unpleasant ways.
Okay, well, I don't know if you've convinced me that World War III is not going to happen.
Yeah, I
think I feel the same as I did before.
Yeah. Well, I know I didn't do a very good job of convincing you because maybe I'm not so sure about it myself.
Mm. Okay, well, I think we can end it there. We'll have a good flight, and I'll talk to you. Well, I'm sure I'll talk to you before, but we'll do our next episode on Wednesday.
Yeah, okay. I'll be in Moscow, safely ensconced in Moscow on Wednesday, and we'll do it from there.
Yeah. Okay, you're in D.C. right now, right? Right in the belly of the beast.
Yeah, right.
Okay, well, maybe, go talk to Trump if you have time and see if you can
I'll try.
knock some sense into him. Okay, Dad, have a good rest of your day and a great flight tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.